I want to thank Skillshare for sponsoring this video. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare so you can start exploring your creativity today. Tool is one of my favorite bands of all time. With Opiate and Undertow, the band had expressed their most raw side. With Ænema, they chose to develop their own take on progressive music. And with Lateralis, they broke new ground in their production. In the 90s and 2000s, it was still a great time for rock and metal music. But Tool decided to go against the trendy genres of the day like grunge and nu metal. Instead, they decided to go their own way. They bridged the gap between different art mediums like music and film, envisioned a world and concept for every album, and did those things with a sense of solid musicianship.
In today's video, I'm gonna look at Tool and their discography up until Lateralis. I'm gonna take a look at their songs, their history, and also their riffs in order to try to understand what separated them from other bands at the time. This is how Tool reinvented alternative music in the 90s and early 2000s.
The members of Tool are very artistic and deliberate in their way of putting together their music, often bridging one medium of art with another. Guitarist Adam Jones, who worked with special effects and visual design in the Hollywood film industry before joining the band, has pointed towards films as a big inspiration for his music. I look at each song as a little film. I like to start with an opening shot and then segue into different scenes. I like to drift off in the middle, go somewhere totally unexpected, and then have everything resolve itself in the end. It's a whole experimental journey. Sweat is the first song off of Opiate, their first and only EP from '92. It's a great example, I think, of the film aspect of Jones's creative thinking. The first 10 seconds of the song is a droning sound with some slight percussive noises that you're barely able to hear. If this was a movie, I think it would make for an interesting opening shot. Just imagine a quiet, dark, and mysterious place. 11 seconds in, and the drums, guitar, and bass blast your face off. It's the equivalent of a jump scare or the unexpected gunshot. If this was the first scene, we're taken straight into the action.
I really haven't learned that song on guitar. I just think it's an awesome song. I feel like it has very much this thrash metal feel to it, but at the same time it's a little bit darker. It might be slightly influenced by some of the things that they listened to during the days of grunge. Obviously they were very different from grunge, but there's just this hint of grunge in there. At least that's what I'm hearing. I think it's interesting to see how Adam is able to translate this visual way of thinking into his guitar riffs. It's a very creative way of thinking, kind of across mediums, and I can see how that came in handy as well with their music videos. Now, if you've been following Tool for any amount of time, it's likely that you know that he is the creative head behind a lot of their videos. He's doing these special effects, these makeup effects that he learned how to do when he worked on movies. It's super interesting how this guy is just doing so many creative jobs, so to speak, in the band.
The band members themselves have appeared in only one music video as far as I know. It was for the song Hush from their Opiate EP. The music video is more of a direct statement about free speech and censorship than anything else. But in later years, I feel like they produced videos that stand on their own feet in terms of artistic merit. Take Sober, a single from their first album, Undertow, for example. It uses stop-motion animation that looks like something taken out of a Tim Burton movie. Although a little bit darker, I would say. It mixes this effect with some live action footage just to give it a surreal effect, and it tells this vague but interesting story about this character that's open to interpretation. I think you get my point. This is not just a bunch of wacky face filters, people lip syncing while jumping up and down, or saturated colors. They connected music and film in a completely different way than other bands, but that is just the tip of the iceberg. Tool had a vision for every album to make them more meaningful and perhaps more timeless to the listener. Again, Adam Jones commented on this in an interview saying, I remember when I was a kid, the 70s prog rock bands would create their own whole world. The atmosphere around their records and stuff was just so cool. They had a bigger vision than a lot of other bands around now who just come out with an album and it seems like a bunch of unconnected songs. It just doesn't have a tight, cohesive thing going on.
Their visions and worlds that were inspired by 70s prog rock became much more apparent once they started releasing more albums. On Undertow, for example, Keenan in particular talked and wrote a lot about topics like nihilism, drugs, censorship, freedom of speech, and often it would be coded with this type of humor and irony to go along with it.
With Ænema, the band got in touch with producer David Bottrill, who had famously worked with King Crimson and Peter Gabriel of Genesis, some of the old-time classic names in progressive music. In an interview, Bottrill explained how he initially thought it was weird when Tool got in touch with him. Funnily enough, they called and asked if I could work on their new album, and they sent me their Opiate EP and Undertow. I listened to them and thought, I've never done anything like this before. Why would this kind of American metal band be sending me things when all I've done is English art rock music? At first I thought they had confused me with someone else. So I spoke to them and asked if they were sure they had the right guy. As it turned out, Danny, the drummer, was a huge King Crimson fan, and Adam, the guitar player's favorite album had been The First Day by Robert Fripp of King Crimson and David Sylvian of Japan. The singer Maynard was a huge real-world music fan. A lot of stuff I had worked on happened to be their favorites, even though they were musically doing different things. They thought I wasn't an quote-unquote American rock producer, but they figured they already knew what area they wanted, and that I would bring something else to their music. Tool were definitely onto something else with this one. Ænema was, according to bassist Justin Chancellor, an album title made up of two concepts, the Ænema and the Ænema. Ænema represents the stuff guys try to avoid, but which is always there, the shit you've got to confront and deal with. The Ænema part of it is slightly a different theme that's more self-explanatory. A lot of the album songs are about evolution and trying to pry open your third eye. The fifth song on the album, 46 and 2, is probably the one that reflects this theme of growth and evolution best. There was a lot of debate amongst fans about what the lyrics meant, but Keenan clarified this some years ago, saying that it's about the 44 chromosomes in our body's cells and how evolution will lead us to develop another pair, adding up to 46. It's what all those people before us who were smarter have been telling us over and over. Every possible piece of architecture they left us, every drawing they left us.
There's a really cool video on YouTube by Max Derat that explains very deeply the themes and the topic of 46 and 2, and it kind of ties it together with the philosophies and teachings of Carl Jung and also Jordan B. Peterson, who has been implementing a lot of his knowledge, Carl Jung's knowledge, in his speeches over the years. Is kind of making a connection to him as well. And yes, it's just a really great video, so there's a link in the description below if you want to check that out.
Their choice of working with Bottrill and his experience with 70s prog rock acts, the multi-layered lyrical themes, and the impressive guitar work echoes back to what Jones said about having a bigger vision. Tool never wanted to just put out an album with a bunch of unconnected songs. Instead, they create albums that branch out and introduce the listener to a new world. Remember, this was in '96. Grunge was still a big thing. Pop punk was another big trend at the time, and nu metal was just around the corner. Tool was way over here with their own agenda.
I want waffles. New album out. Buy it so I can afford waffles.
Now, Lateralis was announced to be the band's next album in January of 2001, but it wasn't released until May that year. With this album, they stepped up another level. They particularly took more liberties and freedoms when it came to production, often adding more layers of vocals and guitars to create much more of a powerful soundscape. They also kept on evolving their musicianship and their philosophy as a band. But what caught my attention in particular about this early 2000s period is that they seemed a lot more confident as musicians. So when I researched this video, I basically read this book right here. It's called Unleashed, The Story of Tool by Joel McIver. Really interesting book if you want to learn more about the history of the band and just all the specifics. If you're a huge nerd when it comes to band and music trivia, this is what you should get. I read something on page 112. It was an excerpt from an interview with the drummer Danny Carey, and he explained what he had been working on during the past few years up until the release of Lateralis.
The main thing I work on now is trying to free myself from time. Sometimes I catch a glimpse of that freedom and shed the shackles and knock down the barriers. It's in those moments when I feel so inside the music that time doesn't exist. That's when I do my best drumming and the flashes of inspiration come. The reason I find this excerpt interesting is because I've experienced the same thing Carey is talking about here with my own guitar practice. I often learn the most when I lose track of time, which is why I think Carey is referring to what a lot of people in the realm of personal growth and athletics call the flow state. This is where you're completely focused on the task at hand. You're also in the sweet spot of being challenged. It's a way of practicing where you're not so challenged that you're incapable of performing, but challenged just enough so that you stretch a little outside your comfort zone. As Carey mentioned, this can happen with music when you try to learn and master an instrument, and it's in those moments that you feel the most alive and free as well. Now, there's one song that embodies all of these things for me. Everything that makes Tool different from all the other shitty bands of the 90s and early 2000s. It's a song where they bridge the film and music gap in the most epic way, where they create their own spiritual worlds, and where they showcase their musicianship at a top level. The song I'm talking about is Schism. The music video for this song is like a movie or a short film. It looks like something taken out of the Alien series. We're introduced to these male and female humanoid creatures that move around and do all kinds of strange things. When researching this, I found a really interesting article on diginterpretations.com. This guy by the username of Jim wrote this article back in 2012, and it's an interpretation of the symbolism and possible themes of the video and song. And to my surprise, it was way more detailed than I suspected. So Jim starts by referring to the lyrics of the bridge, the poetry that comes from the squaring off between, and the circling is worth it.
In this little blog post or article that Jim wrote, he says he believes that the phrase is a reference to the squaring of the circle. Now, if you draw a circle and a square just around it, you get this symbol. And this is apparently a symbol that is found in dreams. It's found across time, across different cultures. And as psychologist Carl Jung said,
the squaring of the circle is one of the many archetypal motifs which form the basic patterns of our dreams and fantasies. But it is distinguished by the fact that it is one of the most important of them from the functional point of view. Indeed, it could even be called the archetype of wholeness.
I tried to do a little bit of research just to see if there's a legit link between Maynard James Keenan, the vocalist of Tool, and Carl Jung. I didn't find any link between those. There might be something out there. Maybe you can link it down in the comments if you find anything. But I don't think it's a far-fetched idea that he's into his books and his teachings. There's many lyrics from both Tool and his band A Perfect Circle where he sings about the shadow. And the shadow, if it wasn't invented by Carl Jung, it was at least popularized in the Western world by him. You find examples in Sober,
There's a shadow just behind me, shrouding every step I take.
46 and 2,
I know what I've been hiding in my shadow.
and Buying Down the River by A Perfect Circle.
Moving in and out of the shadow.
Coming back to the squaring of the circle phrase, the quaternity or quadratura circuli is a figure represented in a myriad of artistic works dating back thousands of years. According to Jung, it's a symbol that represents peace between the inner and outer self, the body and the spirit, the good and the evil. There are endless amounts of details and digging I can do when watching this music video, but to make it short and sweet, it seems as if the video largely deals with the themes of wholeness, evolution, and communication. The metronome in the beginning of the video oscillates, then stops at the end of the video, representing perhaps first chaos and the forces divided, then peace and wholeness in the end. The two humanoid creatures we see in the video go through a similar transformation. In the beginning, they struggle to interact with one another and seem distant. Slowly but surely, they learn to communicate to the point where they gain the power to literally melt their brains together. Again, we see the idea of evolution and wholeness here.
It's such an interesting video, and I really think that they managed to bridge the gap between music and film here. And they're inviting us into this world that make you think. It makes you kind of philosophize about life, about like deep shit. It's so fucking deep, man. But that's not all. There's so much more to them. Their musicianship as well is just top notch, top shelf. I decided to learn Schism on guitar. The best part of the song is the ending. For my current skill level, the song really wasn't that hard to learn because there's a lot of hammer-ons and pull-offs. Like a lot of basic techniques that you can master within not that much time, really. Then there's these chords and there's some palm muting as well involved. And that too is not really that hard. The thing that was a little bit challenging for me when it came to learning the song was timing, because sometimes they just stop and then they start at a beat or a meter that's completely unexpected. So the part where it stops and starts at an odd meter is this part right here. You see, there I got it. But I have to, I don't know if you saw my mouth, but I have to count to 11, and that's when I know that note will start. They have some cool interlocking rhythms in this song, which just makes the song much more interesting to play on the guitar, but also to listen to. Now, this being said, that Tool is complicated and they have some interesting time signatures. There's countless other bands out there that do this on steroids. You know, you have bands like Meshuggah or Periphery or Animals as Leaders or Dream Theater that are known for doing this over and over again to an even higher extent. So again, this is not the frontier of complicated music, but it's definitely somewhat more complicated than, you know, Taylor Swift.
Thank you so much for watching. I want to thank Skillshare as well for sponsoring this video. Skillshare is an online learning community where millions come together to take their next step in their creative journey, with thousands of inspiring classes for creative and curious people. Some classes that have piqued my interests are on the topics of creative career fulfillment, music theory for guitarists, and filmmaking basics. Currently, I've decided to brush up on my YouTube video editing skills by taking this class by Dennis Schrader. He's teaching filmmaking for beginners. What's great about Skillshare is that there's no ads, there's always new premium classes coming out, and their website is curated specifically with learning in mind. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare so that you can start exploring your creativity today. Thank you so much for watching. Cheers.
Hey yo, what's up, boyo? What's up, boyo? Yo, what's up, boyo? What's up?